Well, hello, my wonderful readers. I hope you're getting excited about what's going to happen next because Despereaux is trying to get to the dungeon. But going through the kitchen, he ran into Cook, who was making soup. Let's find out what happens. Chapter 44, Whose Ears Are Those? Who's there? Shouted Cook again. Despereaux wisely said nothing. The kitchen was silent. Humph, said Cook. Nothing. It's nothing at all. Just my nervous Nelly ears playing tricks on me. You're an old fool, she said to herself as she turned back to the stove. You're just an old fool afraid of being caught making soup. Despereaux slumped against the spool of thread, and as he leaned there, his heart pounding, his paws shaking, a small, wonderful something occurred. A midnight breeze entered the kitchen and danced over to the stove and picked up the scent of the soup, and then swirled across the floor and delivered the smell right directly to the mouse's nose. Despereaux put his head up high in the air. He sniffed. He sniffed some more. He had never in his life smelled anything so lovely, so inspiring. With each sniff he took, he felt himself growing stronger, braver. Cook leaned in close to the kettle and put the spoon in and took the spoon out and blew upon the spoon and then brought it to her lips and sipped and swallowed. She said. Huh. She took another sip. Missing something, she said. More salt, maybe. She put the spoon down and took up an enormous salt shaker and sprinkled salt into the kettle. And Despereaux, feeling emboldened by the smell of the soup, again set to work pushing the spool of thread. Quickly, he said to himself, rolling the spool across the floor. Do it quickly. Do not think, just push. Cook whirled the salt shaker in her hand and shouted, Who goes there? Despereaux stopped pushing. He hid behind the spool of thread as Cook took the candle from the stove and held it up high. Humph, she said. The candlelight came closer, closer. What's this? The light came to rest directly on Despereaux's big ears sticking up from behind the spool of thread. Ho! Said Cook. Whose ears are those? And the light from the candle then shone full in Despereaux's face. A mouse, said Cook. A mouse in my kitchen? Despereaux closed his eyes. He prepared for his death. He waited, reader, and waited. And then he heard the sound of laughter. He opened his eyes and looked at Cook. Said Cook. For the first time in my life, I am glad to see a mouse in my kitchen. Why? She asked. Why am I glad? Because a mouse is not a king's man here to punish me for making soup. That is why. Because a mouse is not a king's man here to take me to the dungeon for owning a spoon. A mouse. I, Cook, am glad to see a mouse. Cook's face was red, and her stomach was shaking. She said again, and not just any mouse, a mouse with a needle tied around his waist. A mouse with no tail. Ain't it lovely? She shook her head and wiped at her eyes. Look, mouse, these are extraordinary times, and because of that, we must have some peace between us. I will not ask what you are doing in my kitchen, and you, in return, will tell no one what I am cooking. She turned then and went back to the stove and set down the candle and picked up the spoon and again put it on the pot of soup and took it back out and tasted the soup, smacking her lips together. Not right, she said, not quite right. Missing something still. Despereaux did not move. He could not move. He was paralyzed by fear. He sat on the kitchen floor. One small tear fell out of his left eye. He had expected Cook to kill him. Instead, reader, she had laughed at him, and he was surprised how much her laughter hurt. Chapter 45, Some Soup. Cook stirred the soup and then put the spoon down and held up the candle and looked over at Despereaux. "What are you waiting for?" she said. "Go, go, go, go. There will never be another opportunity for a mouse to escape from my kitchen unharmed." The smell of soup again wafted in Despereaux's direction. He put his nose up in the air. His whiskers trembled. "Yes," said Cook, "that is soup you are smelling. The princess, not that you would know or care, is missing. Bless her good-hearted self. And times are terrible. And when the times are terrible, soup is the answer. Don't it smell like the answer?" "Yes," said Despereaux. He nodded. Cook turned away from him. She put the candle down and picked up her spoon and started to stir. "Oh," she said, "these are dark days." And she shook her head. "And I'm kidding myself. There ain't no point in making soup unless others eat it. Soup needs another mouse to taste it, another heart to be warmed by it." She stopped stirring. She turned and looked at Despereaux. "Mouse," said Cook, "would you like some soup?" And then, without waiting for an answer, she took a saucer and spooned some soup into it and set it on the kitchen floor. "Come closer," she said. "I don't aim to hurt you, I promise." Despereaux sniffed. The soup smelled wonderful. Incredible. Keeping one eye on Cook, he stepped out from behind the spool of thread and crept closer. "Go on," said Cook. "Taste it." Despereaux stepped into the saucer. Soup covered his paws. He bent his head to the hot broth. He sipped. Oh, it was lovely. Garlic and chicken and watercress. The same soup that Cook had made the day the Queen died. How is it?" the cook asked anxiously. "Wonderful," said Despereaux. "Too much garlic?" said Cook, wringing her fat hands. "No," said Despereaux. "It's perfect." Cook smiled. "See," she said, "there ain't a body, be it mouse or man, that ain't made better by a little soup." Despereaux bent his head and sipped again, and Cook stood over him and smiled, saying, "It don't need a thing, then? Is that what you're saying? It's just right?" Despereaux nodded. He drank the soup in big, noisy gulps, and when he stepped out of the saucer, his paws were damp, and his whiskers were dripping, and his stomach was full. Cook said to him, "Not done already, are you? Surely you ain't done. You must want more." "I can't," said Despereaux. "I don't have time. I'm on my way to the dungeon to save the princess." "Oh, hee hee," the cook laughed. "You, a mouse, are going to save the princess?" "Yes," said Despereaux. "I'm on a quest." "Well, don't let me stand in your way." And so it was that Cook held open the door to the dungeon, while Despereaux rolled the spool of thread through it. "Good luck," she said to him. "Ho, hee hee, good luck saving the princess." She closed the door behind her and then leaned against it and shook her head. "And if that ain't an indication of what strange days these are," she said to herself, "then I don't know what is. Me, Cook, feeding a mouse soup and then wishing him good luck in saving the princess. Oh my, strange days indeed." Chapter 46. Mouse Blood. Yes. Despereaux stood at the top of the dungeon stairs and peered into the darkness that waited for him below. "Oh," he said, "oh my." He had forgotten how dark the dark of the dungeon could be. And he had forgotten, too, its terrible smell, the stench of rats, the odor of suffering. But his heart was full of love for the princess, and his stomach was full of cooked soup, and Despereaux felt brave and strong. And so he began, immediately and without despair, the hard work of maneuvering the spool of thread down the narrow dungeon steps. Down, down, down went Despereaux tilling, and the spool of thread. Slowly, oh so slowly they went, and the passage was dark, dark, dark. "I will tell myself a story," said Despereaux. "I will make some light. Let's see. I will begin it this way. Once upon a time, yes, once upon a time there was a mouse who was very, very small, exceptionally small, and there was a beautiful human princess whose name was P. And it so happened that this mouse was the one who was selected by fate to serve the princess, to honor her, and to save her from the darkness of a terrible dungeon. This story cheered up Despereaux considerably. His eyes became accustomed to the gloom, and he moved down the stairs more quickly, more surely, whispering to himself the tale of a devious rat, and a fat serving girl, and a beautiful princess, and a brave mouse, and some soup, and a spool of red thread. It was a story, in fact, very similar to the one that you are reading right now, and the telling of it gave Despereaux strength. He pushed the spool of thread with a great deal of gusto, and the thread, eager perhaps to begin its honorable task of aiding in the saving of a princess, leapt forward and away from the mouse and went down the dungeon stairs ahead of him, without him. "No!" cried Despereaux. "No, no, no!" He broke into a trot, chasing the thread through the darkness. But the spool had a head start, and it was faster. It flew down the dungeon stairs, leaving Despereaux far behind. When it came to the end of the stairs, it rolled, and finally, lazily, it came to a stop right at the gnarled paw of a rat. "What have we here?" said the one-eared rat to the spool of thread. "I will tell you what we have," said Botticelli Remoroso, answering his own question. "We have red thread." "How delightful! Red thread means one thing to a rat." He put his nose in the air. He sniffed. He sniffed again. "I smell. Could it be? Yes, most definitely it is soup. How strange." He sniffed some more. "And I smell tears, human tears. Delightful. I also detect the smell." He put his nose high into the air and took a big whiff. "Of flour and oil. Oh my, what a cornucopia of scents. But below it all, what do I smell? The blood of a mouse. Unmistakably mouse blood. Yes, exactly, mouse." Botticelli looked down at the spool of thread and smiled. He gave it a gentle push with one paw. "Red thread. Yes, exactly. Just when you think that life in the dungeon cannot get any better, a mouse arrives."